Okay, awesome. Thank you for being here, Professor Sorensen, and welcome everyone to this edition of Professor Podcast. We want to start off by you introducing yourself, your backstory, where you went to school, where you grew up.
The whole story? You only have an hour?
Anything that you would like to say.
I am a local person. I was born and raised in Edison and Metuchen. I don't know, I'm sure a lot of you are local to this area. I was born before there was a JFK hospital. So I was born at Raritan Bay Medical when it was Perth Amboy General in 1967. I grew up, we moved quite a bit, Edison, Woodbridge for a little while. But when I was 10 years old in 1978, we settled in Metuchen, and that's where I grew up. I went to Metuchen High School, graduated class of 86. I'm sorry to say, because it makes the story terrible, that Rutgers was my secondary school. I know that's a common story. And I went to St. John's University. So I went to New York to go to college, where I went to St. John's University. I graduated. And when I popped out, I did what I went to school for computer science. And what many students did at the time were I went out and I got a job. I got a job as a computer programmer, then a computer consultant. Then I did systems. Then I opened my own business. And I started doing consulting in the Edison, Metuchen, Central New Jersey area. Like many people with computer science degrees, they reach their 30s and they look at themselves in the mirror and say, what do I want to do when I grow up? And I had done my programming, I made a little bit of money, and I decided I wanted to sort of change gears and go back and work in education. So I started carpet bombing Rutgers University. They were local to me. My mother, who was very influential for me, worked for Rutgers in the 80s. So I sent resumes to every job possible. It's very fortunate for me that I'm not a custodian right now, or I'm not working in the cafeteria, because had I been offered that job, I would have taken it. I was offered a job at the Laboratory for Computer Science Research. I was always a member of the ACM. I was a member of computer clubs. I went and I spoke with the guys at LCSR, and they basically said, he's a nerd like us. So they took me in 2004. And one of the benefits of working for a university is that you can go to school for free. So I began taking advantage of tuition remission. I went and I got my master's degree. I had fun doing it. I said, okay, let me take this further. Started working on my PhD. All the while, I'm in the computer science department. In 2010, a bunch of my colleagues and I sat down and we figured out, hey, nobody's using the computer labs. And we started looking into the situation, and we discovered that we had some pretty old-fashioned stuff going on. 20 computers all facing forward, like it was a classroom, old school stuff. If you Google computer lab and look at the images, there's something missing in those pictures. People. Nobody goes to those old school labs anymore. They just use them as classrooms. So we said, we've got to change things up. And we started investigating collaborative spaces and different up-to-date things for computer labs. And that's when we put in for some development money and built the Cave. So the Cave, our collaborative computer lab, it kind of acts as the de facto headquarters for undergraduate computing. The Cave has been around since about 2010, and I started running the Cave. But as I'm running the Cave, I'm starting to do more academic things. I became an advisor for the department. I started, like Women in Computer Science, I started being an advisor for clubs and working closely with the clubs to help them get meeting space, to help them with the different things they have to do around the university. So at the time, the chair of the department was a gentleman named Michael Lippman. And he said, well, you know what Lars does is a lot of academic things. So why don't we start thinking about bringing him over from LCSR to the computer science department proper? Then Michael went to Brown and Dr. Metaxas came in. So when Dr. Metaxas came in, slowly but surely, they started working towards bringing me over. He then was replaced by Dr. Wynn, who was the chair when they brought me into the computer science department. So for the past 4 or 5 years, I've been working in the computer science department proper, running the labs, doing some different things. And just recently, they decided, okay, you know what? What Lars does is basically the job of a professor. Let's just make it official and make him a professor. So a year and a half ago, they offered me a position in the faculty, and I'm now a non-tenure track teaching professor in the department. And I teach CS 111, the intro course, and I teach the honors seminar. So if you're in the honors, I'm sure I've got some honors people here. If you're doing honors, you need to take a 1-credit light seminar, and I teach that seminar every spring. So I wear a bunch of different hats. I'm still an advisor for the department. I run the instructional labs when we don't have a pandemic, and I teach 111, and I teach the honors seminar. Okay. Right now, I used to live in Metuchen, but my house was like older than the Civil War. So I finally sold it. They knocked it down and they built on it. Right now, I am between houses. I've got an apartment in New Brunswick, and I'm looking for something down the shore so I can, plop my big butt down there in the summer times. But we'll see how that goes. So that's basically it. I was incredibly fortunate when I was young because I had 3 different things crash together at the same time. One was my mother, who was very much into education. We didn't have a ton of money, and she was going to see to it that her kids got educated. So she would take me and my sister to museums. She would take us to classes at night and on the weekends. And she did a whole bunch of educational things with us. Her side of the family, they had come over from Denmark. She was only first generation. They were professors and they were academics. Okay. My father's side of the family were criminals. Okay. They were the ones that ran around and caused trouble. And I'm not going to get into it because I don't feel like defrauding half my family, but they were the troublemakers. And my mother was afraid I was going to end up like the troublemakers. So she always concentrated on education with me. That said, my father worked for AT&T. And I often tell the story in the honors seminar. Nowadays, you ask people where the center of computer science would be. And most people would say, oh, it's probably California. It's probably, where Google is, where all the computer companies are, like Apple and stuff like that. If you had asked that question in the 70s and the 80s, as strange as it may sound to you guys, the answer to it would be Central New Jersey. Because Alan Turing was in Princeton when he was working on the paper that pretty much started the computer science snowball rolling down the hill. Okay? John von Neumann was at Princeton. Alonzo Church, Princeton. Claude Shannon, AT&T, up in Newark. All right. So most of computer science is being formulated 20 minutes down Route 27 at Princeton. Right. There's also the phone company. A lot of innovation came out of the phone company in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. That's where the Unix operating system was invented. That's where the C programming language was invented. A lot of things came out of that area too. And that's where my father worked. So without even knowing it, he was bringing me to his work events. And I was walking around with Dennis Ritchie and Brian Kernighan, who's down in Princeton right now. And I was having dinner with all these guys and I didn't even know it. So my mother is concentrating on education. My father works for the phone company and brings me around all these things. It's a funny story. I shouldn't rat him out because he's not with us anymore. But one day my father came home with this big box and he put it down in the middle of the living room and he called my mother over and he called me and he said, Lars, come in here. Go ahead and open that box. And I opened it up and it was a new computer. It was a TRS-80 portable. And I know I'm dating myself. I apologize to all of you. And it had like a 5 1/4 floppy disk that taught you BASIC. And there was another one for Fortran. and it was my first computer, and I was only a teenager. I guess it was 1981 or 82. I was like 14 or 15 years old. And my mother, that made her the happiest woman in the world. She had a great grin on her face. Her son now had a computer. And she looked at my father and said, "Where did you get that wonderful computer?" And he looked at her. I remember like it was yesterday. I remember he looked at her. He goes, "Oh, I stole it." He stole my first computer from a hallway in AT&T. He said it was just laying there. Nobody was watching it. So he took it so that I could learn how to program. And it worked. I'm a professor at Rutgers right now. Isn't that terrible? Crime does pay sometimes. So that's a funny story that I always tell all the time. And I went on to meet Brian Kernigan down at Princeton, and I always tell him the story that always in the back of my mind, I hoped it was his computer that we stole. He started laughing. He thought, yeah, maybe it was. I don't know. So that got me going. My mother concentrating on education. My father being a crook and a wild man, but he worked at AT&T. And location. I was in central New Jersey, which if not the center of computer science, it's the center of theoretical computer science. Maybe the more famous guys, Apple and Google, and maybe all those guys are out in California. Theoretical computer science is right here. You're in the middle of it. So I was really, really fortunate, and I continue to be that fortunate to this day. I wake up every day and I play with computers and I talk with students. That's what a life, right? I'm incredibly fortunate. So that's pretty much it. I don't want to take up all your time. My goodness, it's already 1:15. Go ahead.
No, those are really interesting stories. Thank you for sharing them with us.
Oh, no
The
worries.
next question that we have is, what is your favorite thing about Rutgers CS organizations, and why are you so passionate in being a part of them?
When you come into a university setting, people will tell you that there's different components. There's research, there's administration, there's this, there's athletics, there's this and that. And what I've always felt is that that misses the big picture. The idea is students. You come to university to learn. And if you're a researcher, you're fortunate enough that students are interested in going to school for what you're interested in, and you can be in the same place and work in your research. But, and this is the part of the deal that sometimes people forget, you need to teach your classes and work with the students and take some of that knowledge that you have and make sure you pass it on to the next generation. So that's my conception of university, is that it's a place where people come to work together and learn together. And if you want to do research, that's great, but you've got to also teach, and you've got to remember why you're there and bring along everybody with you while you're doing it. So that's always been my kind of mindset. And because I approach things that way, I enjoy doing the labs. I enjoy working with the clubs. I enjoy teaching. There's many different levels of faculty, professors of practice, NTT, assistant professor, associate, full professor, super professor, Dumbledore. There's a million different levels, right? I like teaching. What they'll tell you is that most people do research and then a little bit of teaching and a little bit of administration. Well, I have the right job because I like teaching and working with student groups, and then a little research on the side, a little bit of admin on the side. For me, it's advising. And that to me is kind of like, it's not even like I had to be convinced of it. It's how I always thought of it. Where that formulation came from, I don't know. But because I had that mindset, I fit in where maybe some others don't, because they have that research mindset first, and that's what they do, and they're good at it. But I'm kind of flipped. I'm like, oh, I would rather be teaching and speaking with people first. Not because I think I have any great shakes or great brain work to pass on, but I think I see computer science clearly, and I can convey that to students maybe better than somebody who hasn't thought about it that way. Because computer science, a lot of people, if you listen to researchers and you listen to other people speak about computer science, you get the idea that it's hard and that they think it's hard. It's not. It's not hard at all. It's just weird. And if you can somehow explain properly the weirdness, it's not that difficult. It's just a different way of thinking about certain processes, right? It's the old, you need to be precise. And if you're precise in your problem solving, then you can create these solutions that you can then offload to a machine and have a machine do really, really quickly. That's it. That's honestly the only difference between computer science and other problem solving engineering things. And there are academic fights. The computer science is math, computer science is engineering, computer science is this, computer science is computer science. Okay? Basically what we're doing is we're solving problems. And we're solving problems in discrete ways where we can very precisely codify those solutions and then give it to a box of metal and have that box of metal solve our problems really, really quick. So computer science isn't hard. Computer science is weird. And if you can explain it properly, I think it goes a long way towards getting more people underneath the tent with all of us. And then they could say, oh, that, you know what, that really isn't that difficult. Because the more people you can get under the tent, the better, because society is moving towards information technology. And that means more people are going to be able to do more things moving forward. So I just think it's important to teach. I hope I didn't go off on too much of a tangent there.
No, that was fine. That was nice. Another question we have is, why did you choose to go into research in gaming or game-based learning, and what did you like about it?
Oh my. All right, you're gonna have to get ready for another story. As I told you, I used to live in Metuchen, and I had a house in Metuchen, and I'm a little bit of a sports fan. So I had a living room with 3 TVs, and I had a satellite dish, and I had all of the football games pumped into my house on Sunday. So all of the neighborhood people would come to my house to watch football. Now, right next to my living room, there was a small TV, and I had a PS2 hooked up to it. So some of the people would come over and they would bring their kids. 2 of the kids that came over were nicknamed Gump and Spider. That isn't their real names, but it was Gump and Spider. Gump and Spider would sit on the PS2 and play God of War. And one day, I don't know, I'm walking through the dining room getting some chips or something, and I saw them talking about God of War, and it was an incredibly complex discussion. They were talking about different skill trees and who does this and stories and background stories to this big game. And I just, like yesterday, I remember it. I looked at him and I said, can you tell me who the 16th president in the United States is? And they looked at me like I had 5 heads. And they didn't know. They didn't know it was Abe Lincoln. So I looked at him and I said, you know what? If it were in that GD game, you would. And that's when I thought to myself, what if you were teaching history in that game? What if you had a Mortal Kombat fighting game and the presidents fought each other? Andrew Jackson was beating people up with a hickory stick. If you punched Washington in the mouth, wooden teeth came flying out. Taft is fat and he would sit on people, right? You could have fun, but it's also declarative knowledge that you could learn about the president. So I, at the time, was playing with the idea of going to graduate school. I had been paired with a visually impaired graduate student named Wes Workna. Wes and I were coming up with systems so that he could use the computing systems at Rutgers. We built a laptop that would use a camera and read the patterns on the floor so he could get around. We did a text-to-speech thing, so his programs got read to him inside of Emacs. We did a lot of cool, fun stuff. So I was showing that to people at the Graduate School of Education. And the next day, I went in and started speaking with some people, and I said, who's doing gaming here? And they said, nobody's doing gaming, Lars. Maybe you should. That was 8 years ago. So since then, master's degree, PhD. I'm not a doctor yet. I'm finishing my PhD right now. I'm doing my dissertation. And my work has to deal with something that gets a little more complicated called epistemic cognition, why we know what we know, why we trust a knowledge source, what are our reliable processes for making knowledge. I look at non-traditional sources of knowledge, cinema, literature, okay, not fiction, not like reading a textbook, art, music, and that's how I bring in video games. What can you learn from video games? It's basically, if I'm playing a video game, I learn how long a process takes. I can't learn that by reading a textbook, right? It gets a little bit closer to what in education we would call an authentic task, but there's also problems because if you get immersed in playing that game, it's very difficult to take information and abstract it out into the real world. We call that transfer. And transfer is very, very difficult. So what I'm working on right now with some of the research I'm doing is one of my ideas is that if you get too immersive, it's a bad teaching tool because then transfer is difficult. The design features and scaffolds that seem to work with educational video games are things that keep you from being immersed. And in that way, it keeps you what I call closer to the surface so that you can take what you learn in a video game context and bring it out into the real world and use it. And that's a home run. When it comes to video games, some things have had great success already. Learning how to do medical tools, military, special education is a huge one. But as far as a general idea that video education with video games is a good thing, slowly but surely, things are moving in that direction, but it's still pretty much an open question right now. But yeah, as you can probably tell after the last 10 minutes, that's what I like. That's what jazzes me.
I think it's so cool that you found this niche with all of your interests, so education, research, video games, and
It's
teaching.
luck. It really is dumb luck. You make your own, know this, all of you, you make your own world. You make your own existence. Don't let anybody else make it for you. Don't let your parents, don't let that idiot boss make it for you. Don't let anybody else make it for you. I'm a grown man who plays with computers all day. I have Oscar the Grouch on my shirt. You make your own world and then you live in it. So don't let anybody tell you you can't do that. You can. I'm proof. You definitely can make your own. You still got to get along with everybody, but you can make your own existence and you can make it work. That is completely doable. Do not get fooled by anybody who tells you that's not possible. Anybody who tells you you can't do something, just walk away because that person's not going to be very helpful down the line.
How did you find yourself participating and contributing to the computer science education research group, and like what findings have you gotten from that over the years?
C-Surge. C-Surge started when we were first working with the cave and bringing in students and really asking them what they wanted that we weren't doing. They enjoyed their coursework. They enjoyed some of the events and some of the things that they were doing, but they wanted to do more things that were community-based. And they wanted to work on more, how to say, more project-based things. It's funny, C-Surge, when we first started doing it, a lot of what we wanted to create was then 2 years later created by the students. Without our input, it was just happenstance because they wanted to create more community events and more things like the clubs, like hackathons, like all of the things that happened soon after. It was in the beginning of the 2010, 2011, 2012, there were a very, very good group of students. Clubs are usually like a sine wave. They go up, they go down, interest wanes, then it comes back up again. But for whatever reason, it went up in 2012, 2013, and it stayed there. It hasn't gone down. Okay, back when Women in Computer Science had Julie, and even before Julie, and USACS had V and Samin, Sakid's older brother, and then Billy Lynch, and I know a lot of you recognize these names, and they all came up through USACS, and they kept everything strong. They kept doing the hackathons, they kept doing the events, and CSurge was kind of created to try and do what the students did. So we kind of switched directions and said, okay, the students are doing a great job. We're not even sticking our noses in there, because everyone always comes to CS faculty and says, boy, great job with those hackathons. And some of the old people just nod. And I go, don't nod. We've got nothing to do with it. It's the students that run the hackathons from soup to nuts. Everything is done by the students. With HackHers, with HackRU, or I digress. Anyway, you guys were doing all of that stuff. So we're like, okay, get out of the way. Somebody wants to do a fantastic job, get the hell out of the way. We decided we were going to do things more along the coursework pedagogy area. So myself, Dr. Fran Trees, who teaches 110, 170. She teaches a section of 111. Dr. Centeno, who she and I grew up together, I always say, because she was a graduate student in Rutgers Computer Science in the 2000s when I first got to LCSR. This is like 16 years ago. So she and I have known each other and basically come up in computer science together. So we have similar thoughts, similar ideas. We're simpatico on a lot of stuff. So we started going to different conferences, finding out, hey, you can't just teach CS like it's an old math class anymore. You've got to start doing new things with new ideas. And that's where we took CSurge after that. We started thinking about redoing the courses. While I was still working on the cave and doing some other things, Professor Centeno was part of the group that was revamping CS 111. And now it's new and improved, and it's been in its new form for a couple of years now. And she's now working on 112. So we're making progress there. The students made progress with the whole community thing. We were lucky in that, and we didn't know it was going to happen this way. But when we came up with the cave and we gave people a place to get together, it was like lighting a match. Now it's the students that did everything. All we did was create a comfortable setting. But once the comfortable setting was there, boom, all of a sudden now you've got hackathons. Now you don't just have USACS and Women in Computer Science. Now you've got FISBAs. Now you've got COGS. Now you've got the Programming Club, right? You've got a bunch of other clubs, the hackathon movement, every weekend, taking a bus to Michigan to MHACs, right? Going to Hack NY, going to all of these different hackathons. That starts happening. So then it starts bearing fruit. Students who get finished with Rutgers start picking up positions at Google, at Facebook, at Amazon. They are excellent students, so they have coattails. So more people go to Google, more people go to, I'm sure you know the names. I'd embarrass myself because you know it all better than I do. That was part of it too. And it was the students that did all the work. It was the students that did all of the hackathons and put together the groups and put together all of the things. So we were very fortunate. We got lucky. At the right time, we gave everybody a place to hang out. They went and they hung out there, and that snowball started rolling down the hill. CSurge was meant to try and do some of those things, but when the students were doing a better job, we said, we're getting out of Dodge, and we turned around and we started working on coursework and pedagogy and more professor kind of stuff, that boring professor kind of stuff. So that's how CSurge worked.
Is there a specific area in CS research that you would recommend for an underclassman, undergrad to pursue right now at Rutgers?
What you're interested in. What you're interested in, and that sounds like a cop-out and a crummy answer. I'll try to explain it. You're gonna be happy and you're gonna do well in what you gravitate towards. So don't stop yourself. Go ahead and gravitate towards it because that's what you like and that's because you want to do. I could sit here and tell you, you want to make a ton of money, machine learning is where it's at. Bit bop, bibbidi bit, like a salesman, right? Machine learning is popular. A lot of people are doing it. That said, maybe you're interested more in being a programmer. Maybe you're more interested in creating systems. Maybe you're more interested in the social side of things and how computer science affects different parts of society. Do what interests you. Right now, what you're doing is laying a base. The first year, you get intro, you get data structures, maybe a little bit of math. Second year, comp arc, your second discrete, maybe an elective here or there. Third year is those 300 levels, right? They're electives, but they're broad. Principles of programming languages, internet technologies, databases. Then in your last year is where you specialize a little bit. So you can choose whatever you want. Don't think that you have to hone in on something right away. You're getting that good foundation laid down. You're becoming the problem solvers that 10 years from now are going to solve all of the problems. Your foundation is being laid right now, but exactly where you want to go and what you want to do with it, that's in the future. Go with what sparks your interest. Go with what you've had some success with. That's going to guide you more than anything else. I go out and I give these speeches to the incoming freshmen, and I try to tell them about computer science. And I tell them that it's like type O blood in that you're the universal donor. It's a formal science. It's like mathematics or statistics. You learn computer science to apply it to something, right? Well, what if that something is something you're really interested in? Art, sports and entertainment, law, medicine, right? Finance. Ben Yang is going to make $1 bazillion in Columbia because he knows computer science and he loves finance. So if you learn computer science and you become a problem solver, and then you can take those problem solving skills and bring it somewhere you love, that's a happy life. That's end of story right there. Number one, you'll always have a job because you have a background as a problem solver. And second, you can take those skills and go work in an area you like. That's why I turned around and I said, my best experience in my life up to when I was 30 years old was when I was at St. John's University. I love the atmosphere. I love my friends. I love the idea of academics and solving puzzles and always learning, constantly learning. That appealed to me. So I took my computer science background and I steered it 90 degrees. And I went from being a consultant that wrote accounting software. Can you imagine? Accounting software. When I came out of school, I didn't know a thing about accounting. I got a job running the computer system for an accounting firm, and I didn't know a thing about accounting. I had to run the Borders books and buy a textbook on zero balance T-table accounting. I did not know equity from expenses, from liabilities, from everything. You can bet 3 months later, I knew what I was talking about, though. That's computer science. You have to get up to speed fast. But what if you take your problem solving skills and you go work where your passion is, where you really want to be? That's perfect. So I always tell people, look, don't let data structures make you crazy. Don't let algo make you nuts. Get through it. And you're going to be able to take those problem solving skills and go work where you want to be and solve those special problems. So that's what I always tell people about computer science is you're going to take those skills and apply them to something. Rarely, unless you're like an ivory tower nerd like me, you don't do computer science for the sake of computer science, right? You're going to take those talents and you're going to use them and solve problems somewhere. Make sure that somewhere is something you really love doing. And like me, you'll never work a day in your life.
Do you have a story of one of your more memorable students?
One of my more memorable students, I already alluded to him. His name was Wes Workna, and he was visually impaired. Now, Wes had some vision, but when I first got to the Laboratory for Computer Science Research, as you can probably tell, I talk a little bit. So they realized I was kind of extroverted, and they said, Lars may be a good match for Wes and some of the issues we have with him, because at the time, in 2005, 2006, there were not a lot of disability services for visually impaired students to use machinery. There was a screen reader called JAWS that worked with Windows. There was a program called Magix, was a screen magnifier, but they only worked with Windows. There were not a lot of tools that worked with Linux. Now, at the time, the little spark in somebody's mind was this thing called Orca, and eventually the disability software for Linux got very sophisticated. But at the time, this wasn't the case. So I started to work with Wes to find ways to make our systems work for him. So we did a whole bunch of interesting things. Wes was from Ethiopia. He had an incredibly thick accent, and we had to train Dragon, naturally speaking, to understand him so that it could write down all of his papers and take dictation for him. We had to find ways to get text-to-speech to work inside of Emacs. So Wes could use Emacs as his text editor and then have the text editor read his code back to him. He was incredible. His memory, the program would be read to him, and he would go to line 17, there's a missing semicolon. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I've got eyes and I can't see that stuff. He was absolutely incredible. He is a working programmer in Washington, D.C. right now. He and I stay in touch. As a matter of fact, it's a good way to end this is to tell you the story. I was doing these projects, and I decided I was going to go to Graduate School of Education and do my master's degree. And at first, I was going to do adaptive technology before the game bug bit me. And I applied to the graduate school. I had a few faculty in the department write recommendations for me, but I needed one more recommendation. Instead of going to another faculty member, I went to Wes, and I had Wes write my third recommendation. So Wes helped get me into graduate school. I always thought that was a good story. He's still a working programmer down in Washington, and some of the things we did together, I worked with so many students, and I consider them all family. And I could go on for days and days and days and tell you about Billy Lynch and Shahan Akhtar and Sam Agnew and everybody up and down the line. I've been very fortunate because I've been working with the labs, working with the clubs, and doing advising. So I probably have more interface with the students than a lot of other people on the faculty. And it's a blessing. It's an absolute blessing. It's a fun life.
So there are some questions in the chat. Are there any initiatives that the CS department has planned for the future that you're particularly excited about?
Initiatives that we have planned for the future. Right now, it's tough to say. I probably could have given you a better answer to that 11 months ago, because right now, everybody's mind is recover from COVID, get back on campus, get everything back up to speed. As far as the initiatives I think we care about, me, selfishly, I'm interested in introductory courses that Dr. Centeno and I work on, 111, 112, also 205 in discrete mathematics. We see them as one universe, and we want to try to relate them, because at the end of the day, you see discrete structures and you think, oh, that's confusing. I thought it was data structures because I see DS. The reason they're discrete structures and not just discrete math is, like data structures, stacks and queues and all those things, discrete structures are also ways of organizing your data, sets, right? Syllogisms. There are different ways. They're closer than you think, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So we're trying to get everything together so students see it that way. When you're turned into an old fuddy-duddy like me, all of that stuff is going to blend together. And you're going to go, oh, yeah. Why didn't I see that when I was in my 20s? Well, we want to give you a glimpse into that now. So I'm working with Dr. Trees, Dr. Centeno, so we can and it's all, you guys are all done with foundational stuff pretty much. So we want to make it better for the students who first come in. Like I said, it's not hard, it's just weird once you wrap your head around it and you realize anything in computer science, time on task defeats it. There's nothing you can't understand. You put the time in, you're going to understand, you're going to do well. It's just the truth. We just have to get that across to people and convey it in the right way. And if we can do that, boom, boom, boom. So I guess the answer to that question, what I'm excited about is I'm excited about the introductory stuff that we're working on with the teaching faculty and the full support of the department. They say yes too much. They're spoiling us. They should actually say no sometimes, right? To keep us honest. So it's a very good deal.
What steps have been taken to make the cave a more inclusive place?
I wish I had a better answer to that. I try to, when it comes to the cave, I am limited because I have a classroom-sized room that if there's more than 30 people in there, the fire department can come and grab us, right? So if I have ideas to try and get more people and more involvement with the cave. My problem is that if just 5% of the student body interested in computer science comes to the cave, we'll be overrun because of the size. I hate walls. If I could knock down every wall and make that one big contiguous room, I would. I can't. There's vents and there's electric and there's a whole bunch of things. You're lucky I could make the hole in between 252 and 250. As far as making things more inclusive, I try. Sometimes I don't do a very good job to not make it look like a 17-year-old boy's bedroom, right? With like the USS Enterprise hanging off the wall and pictures of Gollum all over the place. I can't have that. That's just too crazy. But I also can't make it too generic. I have people come to the lab and they say, Lars, we wish we could do what you did with the cave. And I said, look, I'm the luckiest guy in the world because I know at the end of the day, I have computer science students. So I can put all of the books in the curriculum in that bookcase. I can put Grace Hopper on the wall and Turing on the wall because I know I've got computer science people coming in, right? I can put up that big O poster in the middle of the room, and I can put computer science hacking themes all over the place because I know I'm computer science. So that I can try to do. Anything other than that, and it's the answer to a lot of different things, but listen, you need to be able to listen. If you listen and hear what students tell you, it'll answer all the problems. So what I try to do when we're live and when we're in person is once a week, I try to go down and sit in the cave. And I don't want to listen in on people's conversations like some creeper, but I want to hear what their concerns are. And I want to hear what they're talking about because I don't think enough people just listen. And if you listen, students will tell you exactly what they're concerned about, exactly what they'd like to see changed, and then you can do something about it. So at the end of the day, and it's very broad and it sounds like a cop-out, but I guess at the end of the day, what I can do is listen more and make sure that you're responsive when you hear people's issues and you need to do something about it.
Thank you. Another question is, you mentioned before that you lead the honors seminar. What class is that and what is the class like?
Okay. It's a Rutgers story because it's complicated and convoluted. There's the honors college, there's School of Arts and Sciences honors, but then there's also departmental honors. In the computer science department, if you want to be an honors student, you need to keep your GPA north of 3.6, and you need to do what are called honors units, which are usually satisfied by taking a grad class. If you're a senior and you want to take a grad class, you can take a grad class and get a little bit of that next level stuff. I think that's a great idea because then you can College is better than high school. Working is better than college. You know the line. Grad school is better than undergrad. There's more freedom. It's higher level stuff. It's the flipped classroom. You do your preparation and you're reading outside of the classroom. And then when you're in class, you synthesize and you talk about ideas with super smart people. That's cool. That's a really good way to learn. Okay. So you would take 2 grad classes, and then the third component is you take a 1 credit light seminar, which is an hour a week. It's called the Honors Seminar. It's CS 195. And I've taught it for about the last 3 years. It used to rotate among the faculty and different people would teach it. Michael Lippman, before he went to Brown, taught it. Professor Stone, he's now the chair. Matthew taught it a couple years back. I took it over 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And what I do is 3 different things. One, I assume you guys know what the X-Files are. I follow the X-Files in that I have a story arc that runs through the whole semester, but every once in a while I have a Monster of the Week class. So the story arc is we look at Turing's 1936 paper and we kind of tear it apart. And we talk about universal Turing machines and the halting problem and how it led to the von Neumann architecture and how that document led to a lot of foundational things in computer science. That's the arc that goes through the whole semester. Then the Monster of the Week classes, we look at individual topics. 1 week I look at hacking and we take a look at the Stuxnet virus and how that worked. The next class we're going to do this coming Monday is on Bitcoin. We take a look at Bitcoin and different aspects of that story and what happened there. We look at CS education. We look, of course, because it's me, one of the classes, we look at gaming, and I do my research talk. The third component, and that occurred today actually, is I bring in guest speakers. So today I had Dr. Allender come in and talk with the students about complexity and P versus NP. Later in the semester, Dr. Wynn is going to come in, and he has been a dean, he's been a chair. Right now he's an SAS dean. He knows about green computing because that's where his research was. He's a professor in the computer science department, but now he's off doing dean stuff. He'll be back eventually. And he's going to come speak to the honor seminar later in the semester. So it's one part people in the faculty coming and speaking and talking about their research. It's one part the Turing paper, and it's one part interesting topics. It's only an hour a week, but what we try to do is give the students who are honors a little bit of context, a little bit of computer science history. I teach them a little bit about how to read research papers, how to use the library. Many of them are going to go on to graduate school, so we try to prepare them for that. Computer science, kind of more about conference proceedings than journals. Let's look at where some of the good stuff is and things along those lines. It's like a contextual history class. So once a week, 1 hour, we do that. And again, it's fun and it goes quick. So that's what the honor seminar is.
That sounds super interesting. Another question in the chat is, how can a student become an Ilab assistant?
A student can become an Ilab assistant by hanging out in the cave and, like I always say, being part of the solution and not part of the problem. The technical answer is send me your resume and an explanation of who you are, biglars@cs.rutgers.edu, and I'll take a look at things. But I'm going to be completely honest with you. A lot of times I get Ilab assistants from referrals, from people who are already working for me. And I say, hey, I need someone to do X. And they'll suggest their friend. I'll sit down with their friend. A lot of times though, and again, and I've said this to people this semester, I will usually go plop my butt down in the cave and just listen and talk and hang out. And then I'll learn who's helping people. I'll learn who's, being a good part of the community without even being paid for it. And I'll approach that person and I'll say, hey, would you like to be an Ilab assistant? I saw you helping this person and doing that and doing this. I can't do that right now. We're in the middle of a pandemic. I haven't been live and in person in my lab since March 11th, 2020. So I'm at a complete loss. And I'm talking to my Ds. My Ds are Diana Sultani and Diane Tran. They're my managers. So I'm talking to the Ds and I'm like, what am I going to do? And they like trying to calm me down, trying to pat me on my old head and say, don't worry about it. We'll work something out. We'll find you somebody. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I need to find people. So if you'd like to be an iLab assistant, bless your soul, send me a resume, send me an explanation who you are, why you want to work there. Maybe we'll get online and talk about it and see what we can do. I used to have a lot more trouble 10 years ago than I do now, because 10 years ago, a lot of people didn't know what the cave was. There wasn't the hackathon movement. I had to really go out and beat the bushes and try to get people to do it. Now, it's an absolute joy, because I just go in the lab and I meet people, and eventually the people who are going to be the good iLab assistants just rise to the top, and you know who they're going to be. Send me a resume and send me an email anytime. And when we open back up, I hope in the beginning of September, come by and hang out.
The D's are awesome. I just want to say I love them.
It was just too easy. There's only one letter. There's the A and the E. So at first it was A and E, and then it just became the killer D's. And then I dropped the killer and I just called them the D's. So that's what I say it too to the other students. I go, just ask the D's. Let them handle it.
They're the best. So since we have only 2 more minutes, I have one last question. What's your favorite video game and why?
My favorite video game and why? Like asking someone their favorite movie or their favorite band, there's no real good answer to that. I would be multiple games. If you're telling me what I like best for education, I like Minecraft. Okay? I'm not going to show it to you now, but I didn't want to be a poser. So I set out with my nephews to kill an ender dragon last year, and I did it. And even though we were all there in the end, it was me that shot the arrow that killed the thing. So I was pretty happy about that. I think Minecraft for educational purposes is absolutely fantastic. And I spend a lot of time in Minecraft trying to create different situations that can be used for educational purposes. For computer science education, I like Lightbot. And I also like a game called Human Resource Machine. It's always cheap on Steam. So if you go into Steam, Human Resource Machine, or I think it just came out with a sequel, 7 Billion Humans, check that out, because you have to solve all those factory problems, but it's really computer architecture, right? As terrible as this sounds, for the past 20 years of my life, I have been playing Diablo. So I played Diablo 1 in 1996. I played Diablo 2 and the expansion pack in 2002. In 2013, I played D3. And just a couple days ago at BlizzCon, they announced that they're remastering Diablo 2, and they're coming out with Diablo 4 in a couple of days. So if you need the honest, nerdy answer, if you're going to strip me bare and embarrass me and make me a nerd, which I am, the answer is Diablo. All right?
Thank you. That's fair enough. Well, this concludes this episode of Professor Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And thanks to all our members for joining as well. You'll find this on our YouTube channel. So that's it, everyone. Thank you very much.
Take care,
Bye.
everybody. Thank you for having me. It's an honor.